I've got a different story for you today. This is from a book called My Best Fiend. It's supposed to say my best friend, but when she was writing a story, this little girl, Charlie, she was writing a story in school called My Best Friend, and she spelt it wrongly. So she spelt it My Best Fiend, and a fiend is another word for a monster. And it was quite a good name for her best friend, because this girl, Angela, is her best friend who lives next door, but she gets up to all sorts of mischief. She's quite naughty and quite cheeky. So this is Charlie who's telling the story, and this is Angela from next door. And I'm going to tell you one of the stories. It's about a lion. So I'll see if you like this. I used to read these whenever I was young, and I've got this book called My Best Fiend and this book called The Fiend Next Door. There's lots of great stories in there. You might be able to get them from the library. Angela and I were late home from school one Friday afternoon because we stayed behind in the classroom to help Miss Bennett, our teacher, tidy the drawers of her desk. She keeps chalk and blackboard dusters and stuff like that in them, so they get as dusty as anything and they have to be cleaned out all the time. Angela and I don't mind doing it though, because Miss Bennett always gives each of us a gold star for helpfulness. And you have to stick the stars on a chart on the wall, and when you've got 10 stars, you get a lovely gold badge to wear. Everybody at school had been talking all day about a circus that was coming to Cockburn Green for the weekend. And on the way home through the village, we chatted about it and whether our parents would let us go. We can always ask, I said. My dad might take us tomorrow night. Tell you what, said Angela, why don't I come to your house for tea and then we can ask him together? Well, I thought this was a good idea because even my dad finds it difficult to say no to Angela. So when we reached our street, she ran into her house to tell her mum she was having tea with me, and I went in our back door. I was so late that my dad was home from work already, and he was pacing up and down the kitchen, looking a bit anxious. Oh, there you are, Charlie, he said, and he sounded pleased to see me. Oh, more pleased than usual, I mean. And sort of relieved as well. You're a bit late, he said. Where have you been? Well, I stayed behind with Angela to help tidy Miss Bennett's drawers, I said. My dad snorted with laughter. I bet they're long and pink with elastic round the knees, he said. What are? Said my mum, coming into the kitchen and starting to clear my satchel and my dad's newspaper off the kitchen table. Miss Bennett's drawers, said my dad, and my mum tut-tutted and said, what a thing to talk about. My dad laughed again and ruffled my hair. Anyway, I'm glad you're home, he told me. I was almost on the point of coming to look for you. Not that there's any real danger, of course. It'll be miles away by now. I looked at him. What will? I said. My mum picked up the kettle and pushed it into my hand. I think it was a hint that she wanted me to fill it up. Thank heavens you're back, Charlie, she said. We were beginning to get a little bit worried, what with that lion on the loose. What lion? I said. But I still didn't get any answer, because just then there was a frantic banging on the back door and sounds of shouting from outside. My dad opened the door and our neighbour Miss Menzies rushed in, gasping for breath and wobbling like a jelly. Oh, I can't bear it, she said. Look at me, I'm all of a quiver. Oh, you'll let me stay here, won't you, Mr. Ellis? Just until it's caught. I'm scared to death on my own. Suppose it breaks down my door or sticks its head through my window. She shuddered and gulped, and my dad made soothing noises and patted her shoulder and helped her onto a chair. Nice cup of tea is what you need, said my mum to Miss Menzies, and she nodded gratefully. Yes, please, Liz, she said. You are kind. And perhaps I could have just a teeny piece of cake as well. I always get very hungry when I'm frightened, and the thought of that great lion roaming around. She mopped her face with a big white hanky. What lion? I said again. But nobody took any notice of me because they were all arguing about police messages and what time the news would be on radio and whether it was likely to be on the telly as well. "Will somebody please tell me what's going on?" I said in a loud voice, and they all stopped talking and turned round to look at me. My dad glanced at his watch, turned round to look at me, and then went over to the radio and switched it on. "Listen," he said. "It'll be on the news in a minute." There was a bit of music and a man's voice said, "Here is the 6 o'clock news." We all went quiet to listen, and even Miss Menzies stopped talking for once. First, there was a long, boring bit about Parliament and the Commons and what the Prime Minister had said to the Leader of the Opposition and what the Leader of the Opposition had said to the Chancellor of the Exchequer. And I stopped listening because I didn't know what any of them had said, and I'm sure nobody else wants to know either. And I think they should spend more time running the country instead of all this arguing and playing about the Commons, and I bet all they do there is play football. But then I pricked up my ears because the next bit was very interesting. "Listeners in the Cockburn Green area of Buckinghamshire are warned that a young male lion escaped this afternoon from Antonio's circus and was last seen moving towards the woods near the river. He is said to be quite tame and not likely to attack anyone, but listeners are warned that it would be extremely unwise to approach the animal, and anyone who sees him is requested to contact the police immediately. The lion, whose name is Hercules, was being exercised on a leash when he broke away from his keeper. Police and circus officials are at present searching the area." Everyone started talking at once, and then there was another bang at the door and Angela burst in. "Have you heard?" she said. Her cheeks were all pink with excitement. "A savage man-eating lion is on the loose and we're all going to get gobbled up in our beds." And then she growled and snarled and pawed at Miss Menzies, who gave a shriek and cowered down in her chair. "Stop that at once, Angela Mitchell," said my mum sharply. "Poor Miss Menzies' nerves are quite bad enough as it is, and if you've come for your tea, you'd better get Charlie to take you upstairs out of the way while I make it." It was a lovely sunny evening, and I could tell by Angela's face that she wasn't very keen on staying indoors. "Can't we play in the garden, Mum?" I said. "Don't be silly, it's not safe," said my mum. But my dad said he thought it would be all right, providing we stayed close to the house. "Cockburn Green is 5 miles away from here," he said, "and it's very unlikely that the lion will approach such a populated area. But don't go out of the garden, will you? It's better to be safe than sorry." Angela and I went outside, and she ran straight down the garden to the play shed. When I got there, she was leaning on the door and giggling her head off. "What's the matter with you?" I said. "What's so funny?" "Charlie," she said, "this is going to be the funniest thing you ever saw. We're going to frighten Miss Menzies out of her wits." She went into the shed and started to drag out the dusty old fur rug from the floor. "What are you going to do?" I said, but she only giggled some more and started heaving the rug down the path to the orchard. Our orchard is nothing but a small patch of rough grass at the bottom of the garden, and it's only got 2 apple trees and a few old blackcurrant bushes in it, but my dad likes to call it the orchard. I like it because it's nice and quiet and peaceful there, as our house is right at the edge of the village and there's only fields on the other side of the fence and you can see the woods down towards the river. And in the winter, when there are no leaves on the trees, you can see the river. Anyway, Angela dragged that old rug down into the long grass beside the fence and rolled it up into a sort of fat sausage shape. Then she came back to the shed and got busy with an old cardboard box and a pair of scissors. "I wish you'd tell me what you're doing," I said, but she only shook her head and laughed. I watched as she cut out a round shape with 2 points sticking up the top like a pair of ears. Then she rummaged round in the cupboard until she found a length of old rope. She unravelled the end of the rope to make a sort of tassel. She took the cardboard shape and the piece of rope down to the orchard, and I followed curiously. And it was only when she had put the head at one end of the rolled up rug and the tail at the other that I saw what she had done. "Angela," I said, and my voice went all squeaky, "you've made a lion." Angela started to dance up and down. "Isn't it great?" she said. "Doesn't it look real? I bet it looks as lifelike as anything from a distance." I didn't much like the idea of frightening Miss Menzies, and I knew my mum would have a fit as well. But the lion looked so funny that I couldn't help laughing. "I think you're horrible," I said. "What a rotten trick." "Nonsense," she said. "It's only a joke, and I can't wait to see their faces." Just then we heard my mum calling from the kitchen door. "Tea's ready, girls. Come and get it while it's hot." "See you later, Leo," said Angela, and she gave the lion a friendly pat on the back, and we went in for tea. Angela kept making funny faces at me over the table, and I could hardly eat my fish fingers and chips for laughing, but we got through them somehow. Miss Menzies had 2 helpings of chips and 2 helpings of jam, roly-poly, pudding and custard, and 3 cups of tea. Towards the end of the meal, Angela got up from the table. "Excuse me, Auntie Liz," she said politely. "May I get a glass of water, please?" "Yes, dear," said my mum. "Of course you may. Just help yourself." And Angela went over to the sink. Our kitchen sink is right under the window that looks out into the garden. Angela turned on the tap and glanced carelessly out of the window while she waited for her glass to fill. Then she gave out a loud shriek that made me jump even though I was expecting it. "The lion!" she shouted. "Look, Auntie Liz, Uncle Ted, the lion's in your orchard." There was pandemonium at the table, and Miss Menzies spilt a whole cup of tea into her lap. We all rushed to the window and looked out. The sun was going down, and the garden was filled with a golden sort of light. Angela's lion looked as real as anything lying there in the long grass, just as if it were asleep. My mum shrieked, and Miss Menzies started to wail, and even my dad said, "Good grief," in an astonished sort of voice. I was surprised at my dad because I never expected him to be fooled for a minute. But he didn't have his glasses on, and he can't really see all that far without them. "Police," he muttered. "Must phone the police." And he made for the hall with my mum and Miss Menzies at his heels, both talking at once. "You've got us in a right mess now," I said to Angela. "The police will be here in a minute, and they'll go into the garden and they'll find your lion, and then there'll be an awful row." "No, there won't," said Angela, and she didn't look a bit bothered, "because I'm going down there now to hide everything. It'll only take a second." She opened the back door. "You stay here and make some excuse if anyone asks where I am," she said. As soon as she'd gone, the grown-ups came back into the kitchen. Miss Menzies and my mum both looked a bit calmer. "The police are on their way," said my dad, "and someone is coming from the circus as well." He glanced round the kitchen. "Where's Angela gone?" he said. I waved my arm vaguely. I don't know. She was here a minute ago." My mum grabbed my arm and shook me hard. "Where is she?" she said in a wild sort of way. "Don't tell me the stupid child has gone outside." They must have seen from my face that she had, because my dad clutched at his hair and then started towards the back door. But before he reached it, the door flew open and Angela fell inside. She slammed the door behind her and leaned her back on it, and her hair was all over the place, and she only had one shoe on. Her face was as white as anything, and her eyes were huge and dark like pools of ink. "Where have you been?" snapped my mother. "What is the matter?" Angela didn't speak. She just jerked her thumb over her shoulder and sort of rolled her eyes. I dashed to the window and looked out, and there it was, sitting on the path near the back door. A lion. A real lion. It was huge and tawny coloured with a dark mane and great big paws. It had a leather collar round its neck and a short piece of rope trailing from it, and it was playfully chewing on Angela's shoe, just like a dog with a bone. "The lion followed me," gasped Angela. "I lost my shoe." My mum gave a little scream and put her hand up to her throat, and I thought for a minute that she was going to faint. But she swallowed hard and pulled herself together, and just then there was a loud commotion outside. We all rushed to the window and saw that half a dozen policemen had arrived carrying big nets made out of rope. There was a very thin, dark-haired man with them, and you could tell straight away that he was from the circus because he had a great big curly moustache and he was carrying a whip in his hand. And it was as exciting as anything, and even better than the telly, and we saw the lion start to back away when the people appeared around the corner. But the man with the whip waved all the policemen back and crept towards the lion, talking to him softly in a gentle voice. "Here, boy," he said. "Come on, boy. Come on, Hercules. Come, boy. Come to Papa." And that great big lion pricked up his ears and trotted towards his master like a big, friendly dog. The thin man quickly grabbed him by the collar and started to lead him away, and the lion went with him as good as gold, but he wouldn't let go of Angela's shoe, and it's lucky it wasn't one of her red patent leather shoes that were handmade in Turin. My dad went outside as soon as it was safe, and one of the policemen told him that the lion had been locked up in a van. Everyone sighed huge sighs of relief, and even Angela soon got over her fright and started to look more like herself again. My mum put the kettle on and made a fresh pot of tea for the policemen, and they all crowded into our small kitchen. The thin man came back after locking the lion in the van, and it turned out that he was Antonio himself, the owner of the circus. He was pleased as anything to have Hercules back unhurt and in good time for the show, and he kept shaking my dad's hand and laughing and saying what a clever idea it was. Nobody except Angela and I could guess what he was talking about. And then my mouth went all dry as one of the policemen brought in the bits of Angela's lion and dumped them in a heap at the back door. Mr. Antonio prodded them with his foot and chuckled. "A decoy? No," he said. "A very clever idea. And my Hercules, he thinks they are real." And he grinned and looked round at us all, and my mum and dad and Miss Menzies still looked very blank. "Who is the clever one?" asked Mr. Antonio. "Who think of that idea?" Everybody looked at everybody else, and then Angela stepped forward. "It was me," she said. "I did it." Mr. Antonio was delighted. He roared with laughter and patted Angela on the head. "Oh, such a little one to be so clever," he said. "What I do for you now, I give you tickets for the show tomorrow, no?" Angela's face went pink and her eyes went all sort of shiny. "You mean free tickets?" she said, beaming. Mr. Antonio shook his head. "No," he said, "I mean 5 tickets." He took out his wallet and began to count out some tickets onto the kitchen table. "1 for Mama, 1 for Papa, 2 for little girls, and 1 for the nice grandmama." We all thanked him and he went off, still grinning and chuckling, and I think he was the thinnest man I've ever seen. Even my dad said so. He said he reminded him of a filleted earwig. I don't think Miss Menzies was very pleased at being mistaken for a grandma, but she was so delighted with her free ticket that she didn't complain at all. And they were all so relieved that everything had turned out so well in the end that they hardly even bothered to tell us off. Although I bet Aunt Sally had something to say when Angela arrived home with only 1 shoe. Can you imagine trying to explain to your mother that the other one had been chewed by a lion? Anyway, it was all worth it because the circus was great. We had the best ringside seats and the lions were fabulous, especially Hercules. And we all agreed that it was the best circus we had ever seen, and even Miss Menzies enjoyed herself. She had 2 chalk ices and a toffee apple. But the best bit was right at the end, when Mr. Antonio made Angela come out of her seat into the middle of the ring and announced to the audience that she was the clever girl who had helped to capture Hercules when he escaped. And everybody cheered and clapped and stamped their feet, and Angela blushed like anything. And I was so proud of my friend, I almost burst. So that was the time that the lion escaped from the circus. So there are lots of other stories, like the time when Angela had a huge big temper tantrum in the shop because she wanted a pair of fancy shoes, or the time that Miss Menzies came for lunch and they put a spider in her sandwich. So maybe you might like to read some of those books over the summer, and then you can tell me what you thought of them. So I hope you enjoyed that one. It was a bit different, and I'll see you later. Bye bye.